be a part of our faculty for our course, I saw a transformation in our cohort. I really saw the folks who had started the inner work, and then all of a sudden Shelly came in and just brought her energy, and I really saw this sort of upswell of activism, and then we just supported around that. It was really fabulous to see. She has magical powers, folks. So, Shelly is the founder of Pandemic of Love, a global grassroots mutual aid community that has connected over 2 million people with over $62 million. $62 million, you guys, in direct aid since the beginning of COVID-19. Yeah, wow. She is the author of the highly acclaimed book, Sit Down to Rise Up, How Radical Self-Care Can Change the World, and teaches self-care and resilience practices around the world to vulnerable populations. Most recently, she was in Poland on the border of Ukraine working in this vein. I don't know if any of you guys were part of the JKC event a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, pretty powerful images, and Shelly was there live from Poland. So she will be giving a talk titled "We Sit Down to Rise Up, Connecting the Inner Work to the Inner Work to the Outer World." Here she comes. Shelly, welcome.
The ship was sinking, and sinking fast. The captain told the passengers and crew, "We've got to get the lifeboats in the water right away." But the crew said, "First, we have to end capitalistic oppression of the working class, and then we'll take care of the lifeboats." Then the women said, "First, we want equal pay for equal work. The lifeboats can wait." The racial minority said, "First, we need to end racial discrimination. Then, seating in the lifeboats will be fairly allotted." The captain said, "These are all important issues, but they won't matter a damn if we don't survive. We've got to lower the lifeboats right away." But the religionists said, "First we need to bring prayer back into the classroom. This is more important than the lifeboats." And then the pro-life contingent said, "First we must outlaw abortion. Fetuses have just as much of a right to be in those lifeboats as anyone else." The right to choose contingent said, "First acknowledge our right to abortion, and then we'll help with the lifeboats." And the socialists said, "First we must redistribute the wealth. Once that's done, everyone will work equally hard at lowering the lifeboats." The animal rights activists said, "First we must end the use of animals in medical experiments. We can't let this be subordinated to lowering the lifeboats." And finally, the ship sank. Because none of the lifeboats had been lowered, and everyone drowned. The last thought of more than one of them was, "I never dreamed that solving all of humanity's problems would take so long, or that the ship would sink so suddenly." That's from Daniel Quinn's award-winning philosophical novel, Ishmael. So I invite you now to put your hands on your heart center, and you can close your eyes, or you can lower your gaze, whichever feels more comfortable for you. And from this space of presence, begin to quietly invoke or name all of the travesties and atrocities, and yes, even anxiety-inducing ills of the world. Homelessness, war, climate change, genocide, food insecurity, so on, whatever comes to you. Sit with that discomfort. How does it feel in your heart center in this moment? Is it too much to hold? Is it heavy? Yeah, it's probably heavy. still on your heart, you can open your eyes and widen your gaze and repeat after me. The best version of the world starts with the best version of me. Again, the best version of the world starts with the best version of me. Great. Keep your hands on your heart center, and now repeat aloud again. Peace begins with me. Peace begins with me. All right. Hands down, eyes up. And now back to the proverbially sinking ship. That dreaded blue and green swirling ship, the pale blue dot, to quote my favorite scientist Carl Sagan, that is hurling through space, this one sinking ship that we're all on. How do we get out of our own way and out of each other's way to ensure that we even have a chance to make it out alive, so to speak? Obviously, none of us are making it out alive here, but you know. So how do we do that? We connect the inner work to the outer world. Never skip over the inner. The inner work is the work of the heart. And you connect it to the outer world. And how do we do that? Well, are you ready for this? I'm going to share the secret of life with you. Shh, don't tell anyone. It's our secret. And it took me 40 years to discover it, and it's probably not what you think it is. It has nothing to do with owning the right things or achieving the right goals or having a certain pedigree. It has nothing to do with loving people the right way or even achieving happiness. The secret to life is this: show up. Show up. Get off your tuchus, as my mom would say. Show up for yourself and for others. Show up physically to create sacred spaces. Show up consistently. Show up even when other people don't show up. Show up in a way that makes every single person feel held and heard. Show up in a way that makes you feel held by others. Those were the opening words in the introduction of my recent book, Sit Down to Rise Up. And I know that some of you might be scratching your head and thinking, what? That's it? Show up? That's the secret to life? This is how we're going to stop the ship from sinking? And my response to any of the skeptics in the room here or online is unequivocally, yes. That's it. It's that simple. We like to overcomplicate things. And so I'm going to prove to you what showing up means. This is a photo of me, sitting on a beach in South Florida where I lived for over 20 years in the early days of the fall of 2015. And these were my Sunday mornings. A clearing in the dense forest of my busy life, so to speak, as the head of a company with thousands of employees, who was trying to be also a present mother, and a present wife, and a present daughter, and a community member, a responsible global citizen, etc., etc. Now, we don't have time for this conversation in this presentation, but I want to tell you that as a more awakened individual today, I no longer live my life centered around goals. I live my life centered around intention. And one particular Sunday in October of 2015, I sat on the beach, and the words that kept washing over me like waves crashing ashore were connection and community. And that evening, with the looming Monday morning dread hanging over me, right? Just getting back in the hamster wheel, a rat race. As Louis Tomlin said, if you're in a rat race and you win, you're still a rat. I posted on my Facebook page wondering out loud if anyone would want to join me on the beach on a Sunday morning for a guided bonded and we settled on a date and time in mid-November a few weeks later. And now I need you to know this. There were thousands of reasons why I could have stopped myself from writing that post, which in this case metaphorically is lowering the lifeboats. For example, although I had been a meditation practitioner for 20 years, I had never formally actually guided anybody in meditation. I could have told myself that I wasn't credentialed enough, or good enough, or worthy enough, or, we do these kinds of things all the time to ourselves, right? And I could have said, what's the point in putting myself out there? Nobody's going to show up. The word in Yiddish for this that my mother would invoke is mishigas, which means just a bunch of nonsense, basically. But I wrote the post. I showed up. I hit submit. And then I showed up on November 15th, 2015, which was a really blustery day in Florida. Gloomy, the sky was about to break open, but I showed up anyway. And 12 people showed up that morning. And then let me show you what happened in the weeks after that. That's me. This is a testament to the power of showing up. Getting out of the mishigas in your head. Over the course of 6 months, those 12 friends told their friends, who told their friends, who told their friends. And what started out as one person on a beach, and then a dozen people on a beach, became a community of over 15,000 meditators who would gather on Sundays on Hollywood Beach to meditate together until March 2020, when the pandemic hit and social distancing began. Okay, so now, being that I suffer from imposter syndrome, yes, even to some degree standing before you today, I can assure you that even as this community grew larger and larger, and I found myself addressing bigger and bigger audiences every week, I thought it was all a fluke, a coincidence. Because simply showing up is too easy of an answer for the world's afflictions. But here's the thing. I kept showing up for things in similar ways, and big things kept on happening. In September 26th, here's another example. Feeling deeply into the connection and community that was calling me, my husband who's sitting in the front row, remembers this. I called him to say, I rented the Broward Center for the Performing Arts, which is in Fort Lauderdale, a huge venue. He said, what? And I said, yeah, I gave him a deposit check, and I'm going to fill up the Performing Arts Center, and I'm going to host an event called Broward Meditates. I'm going to teach people how to meditate. I had no idea if people would show up, by the way. But they did. We sold out the event. And 6 months later, the American Airlines Arena invited us to come and host Heat Nation Meditation, the first ever event for 15,000 people in a pro, athletic event. Really the first one ever in the United States. In January 2017, after the Women's March in Washington, D.C., I came back feeling charged up and in angst over what the future held. And so with 3 other friends, when we came back, we were like, what do we do with all this energy? I was like, let's put up, Facebook was my friend at that point. I put up a Facebook group called South Florida Women Rise Up, resolved to try to make local politics sexy again and to try to, really just demystify local politics for people. And we thought, again, 20 people would show up to this venue that we had, which was a tiny little, my friend's restaurant, and we wound up with 450 people sitting in a parking lot. Thankfully it was Florida, so everybody has a beach chair. So everybody had their beach chairs in the parking lot, right? But, again, showing up. And so now I'll tell you about Pandemic of Love. In March of 2020, as I sat around my kitchen table, I was distraught over the inevitability of everything closing due to the fact that there was a pandemic and we had to stay home. I started to think about the people that were in my community in my community of meditators that would be unable to fill their fridge with food. People who relied for their children on free lunch and breakfast at their schools, right? That's 10 extra meals a week. People who just couldn't go to the supermarket and buy this food. People who did not necessarily have Wi-Fi at home. Kids who didn't have laptops at home so that they could just, tune into classes. I was very, very concerned. And I knew that there were people in our community that had more than enough. And that people would want to figure out a way to give. How can I give? And there was no easy way to do that. So being that I'm not a very technologically savvy person, I figured out how to use Google Forms. Thank you, Google. And I put up 2 simple forms: give help and get help. Literally just 5 or 6 questions on each form. And I put up a 45-second video on my Instagram and on my Facebook, thinking that really, again, at that point I had like a few, maybe 1,000 followers from my community, that only my community members would see it. And when I woke up the next morning, I found out that the post had gone viral. No pun intended there. And we had hundreds of people who had filled out the form and who wanted to offer it across dozens of communities and countries, and people asked me to replicate the form. So these numbers are a little off because we're at 2.2 million now. But so today is almost 2 years, right, to the date. 2 weeks ago we celebrated our 2nd birthday. Pandemic of Love has been featured on over 100 news outlets around the world. We've been endorsed by people like President Joe Biden. We have over 4,000 volunteers across 250 communities now in 20 countries, and we've transacted close to $62 million in aid. We are not a nonprofit, we're a nonprofit disruptor, which means that we don't have a bank account. Everything is direct. Person A needs a utility bill paid, and person B has to call them. And a human connection has to be made in order for them to transact. An opportunity to show up for somebody and say, how can I help you? What do you need? To make that person feel seen and heard, and to get out of our own way, to be able to actually walk a mile in somebody's shoes. Somebody that may literally live across the tracks from you. A person that you might pass by every other day, or who bags your groceries, but that you never stop to have a conversation with. Showing up. All right, so here's the tangible stuff now. So the Buddhist proverb comes to mind here, and I want to just get to this point, and then I'll come back to this in a second. A lot of us in this room, because I've been coming to this conference for many years, and one of my frustrations is that many of us are stuck in this inner work loop. It's like a hamster wheel too. I know so many people here that have multiple certifications, go to every retreat, take every course, all in the pursuit of self-improvement. Great. But if you're sitting down without also connecting it to the purpose of rising up to help somebody else, then I have to ask the question, what the hell are you sitting down for? For what? When will you be ready? When you're healed completely? When the fractures are gone? I will tell you that is never going to happen. So you have to get up today. And how do you start? You start small. You start by tending to the area of the garden that you can reach. It's a Buddhist proverb. Tend to the area of the garden that you can reach. I didn't start this journey out thinking, I'm going to start this global organization, and I'm going to, let me go back to my whiteboard and, design this thing on a SQL server, which I now know what that even is. And I'm gonna have a dashboard, and I know all these words. No, that would have taken forever. Start small. Make sure the people in your community, the people in your circles of influence are good, really good, that they have enough. And then they'll make sure that other people have enough, and so on, and so on, and so on. So this is probably familiar to most of you here. This is a simplified, very simplified version of Joseph Campbell, right? And he describes the universe as a big circle. And he says that there is a line going through it, right? And everything above, that we are not aware of is below the line. And everything that we are aware of is above the line. So when we're living in a state of fear, when we're living in a state of blame or angst or despair, or thinking that we're not enough even, right, to do anything, we are living in a smaller sense of who we are. We are a victimized self, or an offended self, or a helpless self, or an unworthy self. We are below the line. And when we start to practice the inner work, which we're all doing, and we begin to become more self-aware, we begin to recognize these versions of ourselves, and we begin to do what? We begin to break the surface. Sometimes we're treading water, I'm not going to lie, but we come and we rise above the surface. We gasp for air initially, and then eventually maybe we even make it into the lifeboat. So here we are at a mindfulness conference. And so the assumption I'm going to make here is that wherever you are on your journey, whether you're just starting out or you're decades in, is that you are in a state of waking up from a trance, of not knowing yourself, of becoming or being aware of your emotions, of being capable of identifying them and getting in there. So I'm going to share a technique with you that I've used every single time that I've decided to show up. It's just like a default mode for me now. Every time that I'm in despair, every time that I watch the news, every time I get a CNN alert, I'm feeling fearful or outraged about the state of the world or the state of my community or even the state of my household. I practice this, and I call this technique after the rain. After the rain. So for those of you who are familiar with the practice of rain, and many of you might be, but I'll give you a brief rundown for those of you who aren't. It's an acronym. Mindfulness people love acronyms. And I'll briefly run you through it. Tara Brock, by the way, works a lot with this acronym, so if you want to learn more about this, she has a ton of great resources on her website, and you can delve into it. So we're going to move quickly through this. The R stands for recognize, and what recognize means is kind of like, let me recognize what I'm feeling, where I'm feeling it in my body, recognize what I'm doing now because of what I am feeling. And the A can stand for allow or accept. I've seen both used. So allowing or accepting means that we don't try to get rid of what it is that we've identified, that we've recognized, but we actually just make space for it. And the I stands for investigate. And it means that we're willing to get in there, right? To get dirty, to roll up our sleeves and understand what's actually going on without judgment, but really with curiosity. And we're willing to sort of make contact with like an alien life form, right? That just landed on our planet of our body, as scary as it might be. And finally, the N stands for nurture, meaning that we bring grace and a gentle kindness to what it is that we've identified after the investigation. And one of the things that Tara Brock actually said is that through nurture we can loosen the identification. And if we rest after, we can sense that there's a lot more presence and space and kindness that creates a path for us to move forward. So the rain practice ends with the N usually, but I don't think it does. I think that there's something that comes after the rain. Dolly Parton said, after the rain, there's rainbows, right? So here's where the rainbows come in. So for years, I called this empathy action mode. Literally, when I went to the 2017 Women's March, Women's Convention in Detroit, I taught this, empathy action mode. And when I shared, so Sharon Salzberg's my core teacher and has been for over 20 years. And when I shared this practice with Sharon, for those of you who know Sharon, you know, she goes, oh, you mean the tend and befriend? And I was like, what? What's the tend and befriend? And so, and this was, you know, years back, she shared a relatively new study with me about tend and befriend theory, which builds on the observation that human beings affiliate in response to stress. They get together. And under conditions of threat, they, and I, no offense to the men here, but more often than not women, tend to their offspring, tend to the people, the weaker links, so to speak, in their group, to ensure their survival and affiliate with others for joint protection and comfort. And these responses are underpinned by an affiliative neurocircuitry. Now, I'm not the right person to speak to about that because I'm not a brain scientist, but look up tend and befriend. So to simplify things, because I'm not a brain scientist, I just call this empathy action. So we're going to be calling it that too, because I can just wrap my head around it a little better. So we go through the R and the A and the I and the N, and we identify what feelings that we're having, but then we need to ask ourselves two follow-up questions. What are the follow-up questions? What can I tangibly do about how I'm feeling? And how do I come from a place of love? So think about this. If you identify through rain that you're feeling angry, that you're pissed off, that you're outraged about what's happening in the world, you might ask yourself, what can I do about this? And if you're angry, your response might be, I'm going to lash out at this person. I'm going to send this text message, and I'm going to say exactly how I feel or whatever. So the follow-up question is really important because it's, how do I come from a place of love? So simple. Oh, yeah, maybe I shouldn't send that text. That doesn't sound very loving, right? Maybe I should just write it in my notes and never actually send it. So the follow-up question is incredibly, incredibly important. So I want to just walk you through this really quickly in terms of how this worked for pandemic flow, okay? So here are the 6 steps. So I'm sitting, you know, at home, sheltering at home, sitting around the kitchen table, getting text messages from people in my community who are saying, what can we do? What can we do? And I'm like, I don't know, what can we do? You know, why are they looking at me? And then I'm thinking about the people in my community who really need help. And I myself am feeling despair because I don't know what's going on in the world, right? I don't know if, you know, this thing is going to completely unleash, how long will it last? Or take yourself back to March 2020, right? There was no testing, there was no PPE available. We were like wiping down, you know, groceries for crying out loud, right? I mean, like all these strange things were happening. And so I sat with this. I sat with my angst. I sat with this like worry, with this deep like nurturing motherly worry for these individuals in my community. And I thought, okay, worried about my family, worried about my mother who's immunocompromised at home and like lonely and she's alone and just all of this worry. And I had to accept it and I had to like really, you know, get in there and investigate it and nurture it. And then I asked myself the question, how can I tend to the area of the garden that I can reach? What can I tangibly do about this? And I thought, okay, I could just start matching people, right? I could just start matching people who are asking for help with people who are saying, what can we do to help? So simple. And how can I, use technology to facilitate this, to collect information so that I'm not constantly going back to 1,600 text messages every minute. And then I thought, and how do I come from a place of love? I'm not just gonna set money and send it to somebody else. Like, I don't want people to Venmo me. I'm going to make sure that I incite acts of love, and that people have to connect, that there's a human connection. So it's very tangible there. And the same thing, by the way, recently that happened, and I want to point out my friend Emily, who you're going to meet later in the panel that we're doing this afternoon. Emily sent me a text message right before I was going to Poland, and she said, "What can I do to support you? How can I show up for you?" Right? So she's tending to the area of the garden that she can reach. And I said, "Come to Poland with me." And she said, "Okay." And she booked a ticket. And she came with me to Poland, right? And so there's so many opportunities, but we get in our own way. So many of us in the mindful community are stuck in the mind. Get off your asses, people. So I'm going to leave you with one request, and I'm going to leave you with 3 small things. So the request is this. I know that there's a lot of people online that are listening to this and that are in this room that are in positions in tech companies. So my organization, Pandemic Love, has partnered with Global Empowerment Mission, and we've committed $105 million of aid in Poland. We are working with the Polish First Lady and her foundation. We have managed to extract every single African student out of the Ukraine. We are extracting students every day and extracting people immediate orphans. We're getting aid into Ukraine, into places even, yes, like Mariupol. And so what we need now, because we have so many school-aged children that are in Poland that we are housing through our partnership with Airbnb, thank you to Airbnb, we need laptops because these kids really need to go back to school. And they need some semblance of community. Some of them are in shelters also. They're on cots and shelters in places like empty shopping malls. So if you have access to anyone that has refurbished computers, laptops, anything, get in touch with me. My information will be on the last slide. And find me in this, place today. I'll be around. Okay, so the 3 things I'm going to leave you with. First, I believe that in life there should be no barriers to entry. Ever. And so for that reason, I brought a bunch of books with me so that if you're here on a scholarship, you can't afford my book for some reason, please just come up and grab one after the session. So my friend Corey is going to put some blocks of books on the stage. Thank you, Corey. Second, if you only take away one thing from this today, it should be this. If you're sitting down in meditation and simultaneously not getting off your butt in tangible ways, then why are you sitting down in the first place? Remember that. Challenge your friends. And last, I want to share this quote with you from the Talmud, the Jewish oral Torah. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. So I only know this. Our purpose in this life is to love. And that means that we must continuously show up to do the work and to allow that love to be continuously released into the world. We are not free to abandon the work, lest we intend to abandon the world, and in turn, ourselves. The suffering that is on this planet is just an outward reflection of our inner suffering and an accumulation of billions of human beings who have inner suffering, who are not taking responsibility for their inner strife. So if we each only make a commitment not to abandon ourselves first, we've successfully cast a pebble in the pond. The ripple is guaranteed. So I'm asking you all today to commit to being reverse terrorists. It's pretty radical, huh? I want you to plot and scheme and plan acts of love, and I want you to invite love and to ignite love and to incite love and make that commitment. Thank you.
Apparently they did. So we're going to take a break. I have a few announcements before we take a break. Thank you all for your presence.